a Putin ally, now urging the Russian leader to use low-yield nuclear weapons in Ukraine. This comes after Putin illegally annexed 4 territories in Ukraine, about 1/5 of the country. Putin's actions follow so-called referendums in the region that the West and Ukraine dismissed as shams. President Biden says Putin's actions have no legitimacy. And joining me now to talk about this is the great-granddaughter of former Soviet leader Nikita Khrushchev. Nikita Khrushcheva is also a professor of international affairs at the New School. She's been with us on this program before. Nina, thanks so much for joining us once again. We appreciate it. Making a hard turn to the situation in Ukraine from the devastation here in Florida. But this is a critically important topic. Putin has concocted this elaborate political fantasy whereby holding this ceremony and declaring these regions as part of Russia, he's now going to talk about this war as being a matter of self-defense, I suppose. He's already warned he'll use whatever necessary weapons he has at his disposal to defend the Russian state. What are your thoughts on all of this? Do you think this is about setting the stage to escalate things potentially to the point of using nuclear weapons?
Well, thank you, Jim. I don't want to escalate. I don't want to speculate about the nuclear weapons. I mean, I think if Putin has tools that if he needs to use them, he will use them. That's all I'm going to say. I'm actually slightly heartened that Ramzan Kadyrov, the one that you mentioned, the ally, the Chechen fighter, said that Putin needs to use this small-yield tactical weapons, because normally what we experience in the last 7 months, if Kadyrov says something, it's actually not going to be true. So that gives me a little bit of a hope. But yes, it was a tremendous, tremendous propaganda setup yesterday in the Kremlin. And it was just pompous circumstance and all this kind of crazy rhetoric against the West and for the Russian future, which suggests that if you're a man and a woman, that's how you need to fight the West, because you don't have binary gender. There's no economies being taken into consideration, no future of connectivity. And I mean, it was just absolutely, I teach propaganda, so I know my propaganda. That was an incredibly insane speech in this regard. But also I looked at the audience. I looked at his elite supporters. I looked at the government, and the government looked from bored to annoyed to devastated to barely just wanting to be there. There was no smiles. There were very few claps. I mean, I grew up in a political family, as you mentioned, so I know my Politburo meetings, and that really was not a supportive meeting in any way. And I do find this disconnect also quite interesting and something that we want to contemplate for the future.
And this illegal land grab comes after sham referendums were held in these 4 Russian-occupied areas where some Ukrainian citizens were forced to vote at gunpoint, which is just unbelievable when you contemplate that. I mean, how is that even voting? What have you been hearing?
Well, same thing. I mean, it's even worse than when the Crimea referendum was happening in 2014. In fact, Crimeans at the time, it was sort of a peaceful referendum, more peaceful. And Crimeans, many of them did want to be part of Russia. But I don't see, I mean, I think there are some Russians or some Ukrainian with Russian origins that may want to be part of it. But after 7 months, what we've seen, I can't imagine people really wanting it voluntarily. But once again, I mean, the country is in the grasp of Putin, and sort of after 22 years, it's very difficult to protest. But it is, I mean, that yesterday was just another step for escalation. And today I've been talking, I mean, yesterday we all talked, and today talking to people in Moscow. I am in Moscow, talking to people, and it's just absolute hopelessness for what the future is. And you've seen pictures of people fleeing this partial mobilization that he announced. So he says we need to unite and defend the country because now it's going to be an argument. And yet the Russians don't want to defend this because this is clearly Putin's war. And very few of them really want to have anything to do with it.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, we saw these incredible images of thousands and thousands of Russians waiting in long lines to cross the border, many of them fighting age, men who fear the possibility of being drafted to fight in Putin's war, something many of them, I'm sure, don't want to do. I know you were working to get a member of your family, a young man, out of the country. Can you tell us about that?
I did. I did. I don't want to go into details, but I was very lucky. I did get him out of the country. He's fine. But what's just a remarkable kind of, especially yesterday with that pompous circumstance, the announcement that those republics and are now home with Russia, and Russians are happy and excited, and they had this sham celebration on the Red Square. And actually, another relative of mine was driving around Moscow to see what kind of celebration is elsewhere, not on the Red Square. And she was telling me that just police and police and police, and really very few people. So it really just turning into this remarkable dystopian novel that we're living in, because there's one rhetoric and then completely absolute divorce from reality. But yes, thank you. My nephew is fine, and he's not sleeping on the floor. As many those who fled, I mean, they chose to run away and be homeless, and many of them in those countries that let them in, rather than fight in this war that Putin says every Russian supports.
Now, that is a remarkable statement all by itself. Nina Khrushcheva, thank you so much. We appreciate it. Thanks for your time.